Golden-Eyed Monarch. You wouldn't have noticed anything unusual about the young prince if you'd passed him in the corridors of the Winter Palace. He walked like other boys of his station, spoke with the careful diction taught to royalty, and wore the crimson silks that marked him as third in line to the chrysanthemum throne. But if you'd looked closely, if you'd been brave enough to meet his gaze directly, which few courtiers were, you would have seen what made Emperor Kintaro XV send for physicians from across 3 provinces. The boy's eyes were gold, not the warm amber you might see in a hunting cat, nor the yellow-brown of aged honey. These were eyes the colour of pure gold coins fresh from the imperial mint, bright and metallic, catching light like polished metal. In certain angles they seemed to glow with their own luminescence, as if a flame burned somewhere behind the iris. His mother, the 3rd consort, had wept when she first saw them. The midwives had gasped and made warding signs. Court physicians had measured and prodded and consulted texts dating back 7 centuries, finding nothing. One elderly doctor, his hands trembling with age, had whispered that he'd seen something similar once, 40 years prior, in a child born during an eclipse. That child had died before his first birthday. Prince Akihiko was now 14 years old. He stood now at the window of his private chambers, watching snow fall across the palace gardens. Each flake caught the last light of the dying sun, turning the world into a cascade of silver and shadow. Somewhere below, servants were lighting the evening lanterns. Soon, 10,000 paper lamps would glow across the imperial grounds, transforming the palace into a constellation fallen to earth. Your Highness. The voice belonged to Hideyoshi, his body servant, and the closest thing Akihiko had to a friend. The Emperor summons you to the Hall of Careful Deliberation. Akihiko didn't turn from the window. What have I done now? Nothing, my lord. The summons came from the First Minister. He said it was a matter of some urgency. Hideyoshi paused, then added in a lower voice, "There are foreigners in the palace." That made Akihiko turn. Foreigners were rare in the capital, rarer still within the palace walls. The Chrysanthemum Empire had spent the last 2 centuries carefully controlling its borders, allowing merchants from the southern kingdoms, but keeping most outsiders at a respectful distance. The Emperor's grandfather had made it law that no foreigner could travel more than 10 days' journey inland without special dispensation. What kind of foreigners? From the western mountains, I believe. They arrived 3 days ago, but the court has kept their presence quiet. Hideyoshi moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. They say the delegation is led by a woman who claims to be a seer. Akihiko felt something shift in his chest, a sensation like ice cracking. He'd felt it before, this odd internal awareness that seemed to accompany moments of significance. The palace physicians had no explanation for it. His tutors dismissed it as an overactive imagination. His mother prayed it was nothing demonic. He dressed quickly in formal robes, deep blue silk embroidered with silver cranes, and followed Hideyoshi through the maze of corridors that connected the residential quarters to the administrative heart of the palace. They passed through courtyards where cherry trees stood bare against the twilight, their branches like black lace against the deepening sky. Guards bowed as he passed, their faces carefully neutral, but Akihiko saw the quick glances, the way their eyes skittered away from his face. He was used to it. The Hall of Careful Deliberation was a modest room by palace standards, designed for private audiences rather than grand ceremonies. When Akihiko entered, he found his father seated on the low dais, with the first minister standing to his right. 3 figures occupied cushions on the floor before them, 2 men flanking a woman who sat with the perfect stillness of someone accustomed to being watched. She was perhaps 40 years old, her face weathered by sun and wind, in a way that marked her as a traveller. Her robes were simple but well made, dyed in the deep indigo favoured in the western provinces. Her hair, shot through with silver, was bound in an elaborate arrangement that suggested both foreign origin and considerable status, but it was her eyes that caught Akihiko's attention. They were silver, not grey, not pale blue, but silver, the colour of polished metal, reflective and strange. The woman's gaze met his, and Akihiko felt that cracking sensation again, stronger now, as if the ice weren't just breaking, but shattering into 1,000 brilliant pieces. I, Prince Akihiko. The Emperor's voice was warm but formal, the tone he used for official occasions. Please, join us. This is Lady Tomo, who has travelled many weeks to reach our court. She brings a matter to our attention that concerns you directly. Akihiko bowed to his father, then to the visitors, before taking his place on a cushion to the Emperor's left. Up close, he could see that Lady Tomo's 2 companions were warriors, despite their formal dress. Their postures spoke of training, and he caught the outline of concealed weapons beneath their robes. Your Highness, Lady Tomo's voice was low and musical, with an accent that softened certain syllables. Forgive my boldness in requesting this audience. I have travelled from the province of Evening Mists, where my family has served as chroniclers and advisors for 20 generations. 3 months ago, I experienced a vision so powerful that I knew I must undertake this journey, despite the hardships of winter travel. The First Minister cleared his throat. Lady Tomo has provided references from the governor of her province, as well as documentation of her family's service. Her reputation as a seer is well established in the Western Territories. I appreciate your journey, the Emperor said carefully, but I confess I'm uncertain what matter brings you to the capital at such a difficult season. Lady Tomo turned her silver eyes fully on Akihiko. I came because of your son, Imperial Majesty, because of what he is and what he will become. The room fell silent, except for the soft hiss of the brazier in the corner. Akihiko felt his heartbeat accelerate, that strange sensation in his chest expanding now, filling his lungs. My son is the 3rd prince of the realm, the Emperor said, his tone cooling. I'm uncertain what prophecies. He is the Golden-Eyed Monarch. Lady Tomo's voice cut through the Emperor's words with surprising authority. The one foretold in the Chronicle of Distant Mountains, written 800 years ago by the hermit sage Yoshimitsu. When the Empire faces its greatest peril, a prince will be born with eyes of molten gold, and he shall lead the realm through darkness into an age of unprecedented light. Your Highness, the very fact that your son has survived to his 14th year is itself a miracle. Every other child born with such eyes has perished in infancy. We are aware of the historical precedents, the First Minister said stiffly. The court physicians have monitored Prince Akihiko's health with the utmost care. With respect, First Minister, the physicians don't understand what they're observing. Lady Tomo shifted her gaze to include the entire room. the golden eyes are not a deformity or disease. They are a mark, a sign that the bearer has been touched by the celestial forces that shape our world. Such individuals appear perhaps once in 5 centuries, and their arrival always precedes a period of great transformation. Akihiko found his voice. What kind of transformation? Lady Tomo smiled, and for the first time, Akihiko saw something like kindness in her strange eyes. That depends on many factors, Your Highness. The last Golden-Eyed Monarch lived 600 years ago in the northern kingdom of Frozen Peaks. According to the chronicles, she united 7 warring provinces and ushered in an era of peace that lasted 3 generations. Before her, there was a Golden-Eyed Monarch in the southern archipelago, though the records from that time are fragmentary. What we know for certain is that such individuals possess abilities far beyond normal human capacity. If they survive long enough to develop them. Abilities? The Emperor leaned forward. What manner of abilities? Different for each bearer, Imperial Majesty, but common elements include enhanced perception, the ability to sense truth and deception, and in some cases a form of precognition, the capacity to perceive multiple possible futures and choose among them. The golden eyes themselves are said to see more than ordinary vision allows. Some texts suggest they can perceive the flow of time itself, see the threads of fate that connect all things. Akihiko felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and he gripped the edge of his cushion to steady himself. That cracking sensation was everywhere now, as if the world itself were breaking apart and reforming into new patterns. These are remarkable claims, the First Minister said. Do you have proof of these assertions beyond ancient texts and legends? I have the evidence of my own eyes, First Minister. Lady Tomo touched her temple gently. My family's gift is less dramatic than the Golden-Eyed Monarch's, but it runs through our bloodline nonetheless. We see possibilities, paths that might be taken, choices that might be made. When I looked into the threads of the future 3 months ago, I saw 2 possible worlds. In one, Prince Akihiko remains here, sheltered and protected, his abilities undeveloped. In that world, darkness comes, a great army from beyond the northern mountains, a force unlike any your empire has faced. Your walls crumble, your cities burn. Within 10 years, the Chrysanthemum Empire ceases to exist. The Emperor's face had gone pale. And the other world? In the other world, Prince Akihiko embraces what he is. He journeys to the Temple of Ascending Stars in the province of Morning Light, where the ancient knowledge of the Golden-Eyed Monarchs is preserved. He learns to use his gifts, and when the darkness comes, for it comes in both futures, he stands ready. In that world, your empire not only survives, but flourishes. The Age of Light begins. This is nonsense, the First Minister said, but his voice lacked conviction. Superstition and storytelling. Is it? Lady Tomo turned to Akihiko. Your Highness, you felt it, haven't you? That sensation like ice breaking, like the world shifting around you? It happens when you're near a moment of significance, a point where multiple futures branch away from each other. You've been feeling it more frequently lately, haven't you? Perhaps even today, when you learned of our arrival? Akihiko stared at her, unable to speak. How could she know? The Emperor looked at his son with an expression Akihiko had never seen before. Fear mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps. Or wonder. Akihiko, is this true? you experience such sensations? He wanted to deny it, wanted to laugh it off as the delusions of a foreigner who'd travelled too long in the winter mountains. But he'd never lied to his father, and he found he couldn't start now. Yes, he said quietly. Since I was a child, I thought everyone felt such things. No, Your Highness, Lady Tomo said gently. They do not. What you feel is the fundamental nature of reality, the constant branching of possibility, the eternal choosing between paths. Most people are blind to it, moving through their lives as if only one future exists. But you can perceive choosing itself. That gift will grow stronger as you age, assuming you survive. Assuming he survives? The Emperor's voice sharpened. What do you mean? Development of a Golden-Eyed Monarch's abilities is dangerous. The mind and body must adapt to perceiving things not meant for human awareness. Without proper training, without the guidance preserved at the Temple of Ascending Stars, most candidates destroy themselves. They see too much, understand too much, and their minds shatter under the weight of infinite possibility. That's why the previous golden-eyed children died young. Not from any physical ailment, but because their gifts awakened before they could be controlled. Then why has Akihiko survived this long? The First Minister asked. Because his gifts have awakened slowly, and because... Lady Tomo paused, choosing her words carefully. Because some part of him has been resisting the awakening, perhaps instinctively sensing the danger. But that resistance cannot hold much longer. Within the next year, perhaps sooner, his abilities will fully manifest. If he is untrained when that happens, the result will be catastrophic. The Emperor stood, pacing to the window where snow continued to fall in the darkness. You asked me to send my son, third in line to the throne, to a temple in a distant province during winter, based on prophecies and visions. You ask me to believe that he possesses supernatural abilities, and that the Empire faces some unnamed darkness from the north. Do you understand how this sounds? I do, Imperial Majesty, but I also know what I have seen. The threads of fate are rarely so clear, but in this matter they shine like golden wire. Your son is important beyond measure, not just to your empire, but to the entire world. What comes from the north? It is not merely an army, it is something older, something that should not exist in the waking world. Only a golden-eyed monarch can stand against it. Akihiko found himself speaking again, the words coming from some deep place he didn't fully understand. I'll go. Everyone turned to look at him. I'll go to this temple, he continued, his voice steady, despite the fear coiling in his stomach. If there's even a chance that what Lady Tomo says is true, I have to try. These eyes, he touched his face. They've marked me my entire life. People fear me. They whisper that I'm cursed, that I'm not entirely human. If there's a reason for it, if there's something I'm meant to do, then I need to know. The Emperor returned to his seat, his face troubled. You're 14 years old, Akihiko. The journey alone would take weeks through mountain passes that claim lives even in good weather. And we knew nothing of this Temple of Ascending Stars or who tends it. The temple is real, Imperial Majesty, Lady Tomo said. It has stood for over 1,000 years, though few remember its true purpose. It is maintained by an order of monks who have preserved the teachings of the Golden-Eyed Monarch since ancient times. I have been there myself. The journey is difficult, but not impossible. especially for those who know the safe routes. You would guide him? The First Minister asked. I would consider it the greatest honor of my life. The Emperor sat in silence for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap. Akihiko recognized the expression, his father weighing choices, considering consequences. Finally, he spoke. I will not make this decision tonight. Lady Tomo, you and your companions will be given quarters in the palace. I will consult with my advisors, with the court astrologers, and with the scholars who maintain our historical archives. If even a fraction of what you say can be verified, we will discuss this matter further. For now, this audience is concluded. They all rose and bowed. As Lady Tomoe moved toward the door, she caught Akihiko's eye and gave him a small nod. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or encouragement. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of mountain herbs and the lingering impression of silver eyes. The Emperor dismissed everyone except Akihiko. When they were alone, he gestured for his son to sit beside him on the dais. Tell me truly, he said, dropping the formal tone. How long have you been experiencing these sensations she described? As long as I can remember, Father, but they've been getting stronger lately, especially in the last few months. And sometimes I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads I can't see, with paths branching in every direction. Are you frightened? Akihiko considered the question. Yes, but not of the journey, or the training, or whatever abilities I might develop. I'm frightened of doing nothing, of hiding here in the palace while something terrible approaches. I've always felt like these eyes meant something, like they came with a purpose. If Lady Tomo is right, if I'm supposed to protect the Empire. You're 14, the Emperor said again, but gently this time. You should be studying poetry and learning statecraft, not preparing to face unnamed darkness from the north. I'll be 15 in 3 months. You were leading troops in border skirmishes when you were 16. That was different. The Emperor stopped, perhaps realizing the argument was weak. I'm your father, Akihiko. My duty is to keep you safe. And I'm a prince of the realm. My duty is to serve the Empire, whatever that service requires. The Emperor pulled his son into an unexpected embrace. Akihiko couldn't remember the last time his father had held him like this. Perhaps not since he was a small child, before the golden eyes had made everyone, even family, maintain a careful distance. I'll need 3 days to consult the archives and the astrologers, the Emperor said, but I suspect I already know what my answer will be. You have your mother's courage, even if you have your father's stubbornness. Over the next 3 days, the palace buzzed with quiet speculation. The presence of the Western delegation couldn't be kept secret, and rumors spread like wildfire through the corridors and courtyards. Some said the foreigners had brought news of war. Others whispered about prophecies and dark magic. A few claimed the Emperor was planning to send Prince Akihiko away to break a curse. Akihiko spent the time in the library, reading everything he could find about Golden-Eyed Monarchs and the Temple of Ascending Stars. The historical records were fragmentary and contradictory. One text described a golden-eyed monarch who could see 100 years into the future. Another claimed such individuals could move objects with their minds. A third suggested they could walk between moments of time like ordinary people walked between rooms. What all the texts agreed on was that golden-eyed monarchs were rare, powerful, and dangerous, to themselves as much as to others. On the morning of the 4th day, the emperor summoned a small council to the pavilion of clear thinking. Akihiko, Lady Tomoe, the first minister, the court astrologer, and the keeper of the archives. Snow fell softly outside the windows as they gathered. The keeper of the archives, an ancient woman named Sachiko, spoke first. The historical evidence, though limited, supports Lady Tomoe's basic claims. Golden-eyed monarchs do appear in the records, though rarely, and they are consistently associated with periods of great change. As for the Temple of Ascending Stars, it exists in the records as well, though it is referenced by several different names across the centuries. Built during the 7th dynasty, approximately 1,200 years ago, as a repository of esoteric knowledge. The court astrologer, a thin man with nervous hands, added his observations. The celestial signs are unusual, Your Majesty. Mars has been particularly bright in the northern sky, and there have been 3 lunar eclipses in the past year, a rare configuration. The old texts suggest such alignments often precede periods of upheaval. I cannot confirm Lady Tomoe's specific prophecy, but the heavens are certainly restless. The Emperor turned to Lady Tomoe. If I allow this journey, what guarantees can you provide for my son's safety? None, Imperial Majesty. The journey will be dangerous, and the training, if he proves capable of it, will be more dangerous still. But I can tell you that the danger of inaction is absolute. The darkness I have seen coming from the north will not be deterred by walls or armies. Only a golden-eyed monarch stands a chance against it. And you claim to know when this darkness will arrive? The timing is uncertain, as all futures are uncertain. But I perceive it as imminent, within 5 years at the longest, possibly sooner. Time moves differently in the north, Imperial Majesty. Things that should not be waking are waking. Ancient barriers are weakening. The First Minister leaned forward. You speak in riddles, Lady Tomoe. If you want us to send the prince into the mountains during winter, we need more specific information. What exactly comes from the north? Lady Tomoe's silver eyes grew distant, as if she were seeing something far away. I am not certain, First Minister. My visions show me only fragments, vast shapes moving through blizzards, darkness that swallows light, and screaming in a language older than human speech. Whatever it has slept for a very long time, perhaps since before the empire itself was founded, but it is waking now, and when it fully rises, it will come south like a storm of annihilation. Silence fell over the pavilion. Finally, the Emperor spoke. Akihiko, you've heard all of this. Do you still wish to go? Yes, Father. Even knowing you might not return, even knowing the training itself might destroy you? Yes. The Emperor closed his eyes briefly, and Akihiko saw the weight of the decision pressing down on him. When he opened them again, they were clear and resolved. Then you will go, but not alone. You will take a company of the palace guard, 20 soldiers, veterans all. You will take Hideyoshi, who has served you faithfully. You will take supplies for 3 months and gold enough to purchase whatever else you need. Lady Tomoe will guide you, but Captain Roku will command the escort and make all decisions regarding your safety. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me yet. When you return, and you will return, Akihiko, I'm ordering you to return. You'll still be third in line to the throne, and you'll still have all the duties that entails. This journey is not an escape from your responsibilities, but a preparation for them. Do you understand? I understand. They departed on the first day of the new year, when custom held that any journey begun would be blessed by fortune. 20 guards in winter armor, Hideyoshi bundled against the cold, Lady Tomoe and her 2 companions, and Akihiko himself, wearing plain traveling robes with a hood to hide his distinctive eyes. His mother came to see him off, pressing a small jade pendant into his hands, a family heirloom that had belonged to her grandfather. "Come back to me," she whispered, and Akihiko promised he would try. They traveled north and west, following routes Lady Tomoe knew through valleys and along ridge lines where the snow lay less deep. The journey was hard, the days short and bitter cold. At night, they sheltered in the way stations, or when those weren't available, in tents that the guards erected with practiced efficiency. Akihiko found himself spending much of each day riding beside Lady Tomoe, asking questions about the temple, about previous Golden-Eyed Monarchs, about what he might expect from the training. Each person's experience is different, she told him, as they navigated a narrow mountain trail, with cliffs dropping away on both sides. The abilities manifest according to the individual's nature. Some golden-eyed monarchs became warriors, able to see their opponent's moves before they were made. Others became sages, perceiving the deep patterns that connect all things. One, according to the chronicles, became a healer who could see the branching paths of disease and choose the routes that led to health. "What do you think I'll become?" "I don't know, Your Highness, but I sense in you a particular strength, a capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to see all sides of a question without losing yourself in confusion. That quality will serve you well. The training at the temple is designed to expand your consciousness, to help you perceive and navigate the infinite branching of possibility without being overwhelmed by it." They stopped that night at a mountain monastery, where monks with shaved heads welcomed them with quiet hospitality. Over dinner, one of the older monks asked Akihiko about his journey, and when he gave a vague answer about seeking education in the western provinces, the monk smiled knowingly. "The Temple of Ascending Stars is an interesting place to seek education," the monk said. "But then, interesting times require interesting preparations. I wish you well, young prince. The mountains have been restless lately. Something stirs in the deep places." After 23 days of travel, they reached the province of Morning Light. The temperature was slightly warmer here, though snow still covered the ground. They passed through several small towns where the local lords offered hospitality, though Akihiko noticed that Lady Tomoe was careful never to reveal his true identity. On the afternoon of the 27th day, they rounded a ridge and saw it, the Temple of Ascending Stars, perched on a mountainside like an eagle's nest. It was larger than Akihiko had expected, a complex of buildings connected by covered walkways, with a central tower that rose 7 stories into the pale sky. Even from a distance, you could feel something emanating from the place, a sense of deep time and accumulated wisdom. "There," Lady Tomoe said unnecessarily. "Your destination, Your Highness, and perhaps your destiny." As they approached the temple gates, Akihiko felt that familiar sensation of ice cracking, stronger than he'd ever experienced. The world seemed to shimmer around him, and for just a moment, he saw himself standing in this exact spot but in different seasons. In spring with flowers blooming, in summer with the sun blazing, in autumn with leaves falling like rain. Multiple versions of himself, multiple timelines, all converging on this single point. Then the moment passed, and there was only the present, the cold mountain air, the sound of horses' hooves on stone, and the massive bronze gates of the temple opening to receive them. A figure emerged from the shadows of the gate, an elderly woman in grey robes, her face serene and ageless. When she looked at Akihiko, her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Welcome, Golden-Eyed Monarch," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain silence. "We have waited a very long time for you." The Curse of the Hope Diamond. You've probably heard whispers about cursed objects, those relics that seem to carry misfortune in their wake, like a shadow that never quite lifts. The Hope Diamond sits in the Smithsonian now, behind thick glass, spinning slowly under carefully calibrated lights that make its deep blue facets gleam with an almost supernatural intensity. Tourists press close, phones raised, trying to capture that famous color, that legendary stone. What they're really trying to photograph is danger made beautiful, tragedy crystallized into 45.52 carats of mineralogical perfection. The curse, if you believe in such things, has supposedly been dormant since the diamond found its final home in that museum case. But the stories that led it there, those tales of ruin and death and inexplicable misfortune, those stories never quite lose their power to unsettle. The diamond's journey began not in some European court, but in India, sometime in the 17th century, when a stone of remarkable size and even more remarkable color was pried from the earth. The exact location has been lost to time, though most scholars point to the Kolar mine in Golconda, a place that produced some of history's most famous diamonds. This stone, in its original form, weighed over 100 carats, a blue so deep and saturated that it seemed to hold night itself within its atomic structure. The color comes from trace amounts of boron atoms scattered through the crystal lattice, a geological accident that created something humans would kill for. According to the most persistent legend, the stone was originally set in a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita, where it served as one of her eyes, watching over her devotees with that penetrating blue gaze. A French merchant and trader named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier supposedly stole the diamond from the statue during his extensive travels through India. The moment he pried that stone from the goddess's face, the story goes, he sealed not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone who would subsequently possess the gem. The priests, discovering the theft, pronounced a curse upon the diamond and anyone who would dare claim it as their own. Tavernier, so the legend claims, was eventually torn apart by wild dogs in Russia, though historical records tell a less dramatic story of a merchant who died peacefully of natural causes. But let's set aside for a moment what actually happened to Tavernier and focus instead on what people believed happened, because the power of a curse lies not in metaphysical reality, but in the human imagination, and the meaning we assign to patterns we perceive in chaos. Tavernier, cursed or not, sold the diamond to King Louis XIV of France in 1668. The Sun King, always eager to add to his legendary collection of jewels, purchased the stone along with thousands of other diamonds Tavernier had brought back from India. Louis had the diamond cut by his court jeweler, Sieur Pitot, reducing its weight to 67 carats, but increasing its brilliance. The king wore it on ceremonial occasions, and for a time the diamond brought no obvious misfortune. Louis XIV lived into his 70s, a remarkable age for the era, and died in his bed surrounded by the splendour of Versailles. His great-grandson, Louis XV, inherited the stone and the throne. Louis XV lent the diamond occasionally to his mistress, Madame de Montespan, and later to Madame de Barry. Here, the curse, if we're tracking it, supposedly began to show its teeth. Madame de Montespan fell from royal favour and ended her days in a convent. Madame de Barry's fate was worse. She was arrested during the French Revolution and lost her head to the guillotine in 1793, though thousands of aristocrats met the same end, cursed diamond or not. Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette both wore the diamond on occasion. You know what happened to them? The revolution, the imprisonment, the executions. Their heads fell into baskets while crowds cheered. Was the diamond responsible, or were they simply victims of historical forces far beyond any gemstone's influence? The revolutionary government confiscated the crown jewels, including the blue diamond, and for a time it sat in a treasury, while France tore itself apart and rebuilt itself over and over again. In September 1792, during a week of chaos and looting, thieves broke into the Garde Meuble, the royal treasury, and stole the French blue along with other crown jewels. The diamond vanished into the underworld of gem dealers and criminals, its trail going cold for decades. Some of the stolen jewels eventually surfaced and were recovered, but the great blue diamond seemed to have disappeared entirely, as if the earth had swallowed it back up, or as if it had never existed at all. What happened during those missing years remains largely mysterious. The diamond had to have been recut to disguise its identity and make it easier to sell. Somewhere, a gem cutter sat down with perhaps the most famous diamond in Europe and deliberately destroyed its original form, grinding away carats of priceless stone to create something new, something that couldn't be immediately recognized. That recutting probably happened in London, which was the center of the diamond trade at the time. The new stone that emerged weighed approximately 45 carats, smaller than the French blue, but still possessing that extraordinary deep blue color that made it unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. The diamond resurfaced in 1812 in the possession of a London diamond merchant named Daniel Eliasson. Eliasson listed it in his catalogue, describing a deep blue brilliant cut diamond of 44.5 carats. Historical gemologists have compared drawings and descriptions of the French blue with the dimensions and characteristics of what would become the Hope diamond, and the consensus is that they are the same stone, recut to avoid identification. How Eliasson acquired it, who cut it, and what happened in the 20 years between its theft and its appearance in his catalogue remains unknown. Perhaps someday documents will surface that fill in those gaps, or perhaps the secret died with the people who engineered the diamond's transformation. Eliasson sold or passed the diamond to King George IV of England, adding another monarch to the stone's list of owners. George IV was a collector and a spendthrift who accumulated vast debts over his lifetime. When he died in 1830, deeply in debt and not particularly mourned, his possessions were sold to cover what he owed. The diamond was acquired by Henry Philip Hope, a wealthy London banking heir and gem collector, sometime around 1839. Hope's ownership gave the diamond the name it still carries today. He added it to his extensive gem collection, displaying it occasionally, but mostly keeping it secure. When Henry Philip Hope died in 1839, The diamond passed to his nephew, Henry Thomas Hope, and then eventually to Henry Thomas's grandson, Lord Francis Hope. Lord Francis Hope had a talent for making poor decisions. He married an American actress named May Yohe, and their marriage quickly turned contentious. Francis's financial situation deteriorated rapidly, his gambling and spending far outpacing his income. Desperately needing money, he sought permission to sell the famous diamond. British law at the time made it difficult for heirs to sell parts of entailed estates, but Francis persisted, and in 1901 he finally received permission to sell the Hope diamond. The sale brought him $154,000, a substantial sum, but far less than the diamond was worth. The money didn't save him. His marriage collapsed. May Yohe left him for another man, and Francis ended his days in reduced circumstances, a formerly wealthy aristocrat brought low by debt and poor judgment. May Yohe, the actress who had briefly been the wife of the Hope Diamond's owner, told reporters years later that the diamond was definitely cursed, and that touching it had brought her nothing but misfortune. She claimed that every person associated with the diamond suffered terrible fates. Of course, by the time she was making these claims, the curse narrative had become part of the diamond's mystique, and claiming to be a victim of the curse was a way of explaining away the ordinary human feelings that had actually destroyed her marriage and her finances. People want their tragedies to mean something, to be part of a larger story, rather than just the predictable consequences of their choices. After leaving Lord Hope's possession, the diamond was purchased by a New York diamond merchant named Simon Frankel, who resold it to a syndicate of buyers. The stone passed through several dealers' hands, each transaction adding to its provenance and perhaps to its legend. In 1909, the diamond was acquired by Pierre Cartier, the famous French jeweler. Cartier recognized that the diamond's growing reputation for being cursed was actually a selling point rather than a liability. A cursed diamond was interesting. A cursed diamond was unique. A cursed diamond was something that wealthy collectors might pay extraordinary sums to own. Danger and beauty combined into a single object. Cartier set his sights on selling the diamond to Evelyn Walsh McLean, an American heiress whose family fortune came from gold mining and newspapers. Evelyn was young, wealthy, bored, and fascinated by the exotic and the dramatic. She was exactly the kind of buyer who might find a cursed diamond irresistible. When Cartier first showed her the diamond, she wasn't particularly impressed. So Cartier did what any good salesman would do. He enhanced the story. He embellished the curse, adding dramatic details and tragic fates. He told Evelyn about everyone who had owned the diamond and suffered, weaving together truth and exaggeration until the diamond's history sounded like something from a Gothic novel. The strategy worked perfectly. Evelyn Walsh McLean became obsessed with owning the Hope diamond. In 1911, Evelyn purchased the diamond for approximately $180,000. She wore it frequently, mounting it on the chain and wearing it around her neck to parties and social events. She even let her children play with it occasionally, the world's most famous diamond becoming a toy in the hands of kids who had no idea what they were holding. Evelyn reportedly believed that curses only worked on people who believed in them, and she claimed not to be superstitious. She wore the diamond as a talisman, something that set her apart from everyone else in her social circle. For a time, her life seemed charmed rather than cursed. She was wealthy, married, and socially prominent. But then the pattern that people would later interpret as the curse began to assert itself in her life. Her eldest son, Vincent, was killed in a car accident at age 9. The loss devastated Evelyn, and she began drinking heavily to cope with her grief. Her marriage to Edward McLean deteriorated as they both struggled with alcoholism and the death of their child. Edward was eventually declared mentally incompetent and spent the last years of his life in a psychiatric institution. Their daughter Evelyn committed suicide at age 25. The family newspaper, the Washington Post, nearly went bankrupt. Evelyn herself struggled with addiction and financial problems for years. Were these tragedies the result of an ancient curse placed on a diamond stolen from a goddess? Or were they the predictable consequences of extreme wealth, lack of purpose, addiction, and the ordinary sorrows that befall families, regardless of what jewelry they own? Evelyn's son died in a car accident, the kind of tragedy that happened to thousands of families as automobiles became common and traffic fatalities soared. Her husband and daughter both struggled with mental health issues, conditions that were poorly understood and poorly treated in that era. The newspaper industry was volatile, and many publications failed during economic downturns. Evelyn's own addiction was enabled by the wealth that allowed her to indulge every impulse without immediate consequences. Yet people preferred the curse explanation because it was more interesting than admitting that wealth couldn't protect you from grief, that privilege didn't make you immune to addiction, that some suffering was simply random and meaningless. The Hope Diamond curse became a way of explaining why the McLean family's wealth hadn't brought them happiness. It became a story about hubris and fate, about forces beyond human control, punishing those who reached too high or took what wasn't theirs. It was a more satisfying narrative than the truth, which was that the McLeans were deeply troubled people who would have been troubled whether they owned a famous diamond or not. When Evelyn Walsh McLean died in 1947, she still owned the Hope Diamond. Her estate was in chaos, debts and taxes eating away at what remained of her fortune. Her jewellery collection, including the diamond, was purchased by Harry Winston, perhaps the most famous diamond dealer of the 20th century. Winston was a different breed of diamond owner entirely. He wasn't an aristocrat or an heiress collecting beautiful objects for display. He was a businessman who understood that diamonds were commodities, investments, items to be bought and sold for profit. The Hope Diamond sat in his inventory for years while he displayed it at various exhibitions and charity events, using it to generate publicity for his business. Winston seemed entirely immune to the curse, if it existed. His business thrived. His personal life was stable. He suffered no unusual tragedies or financial reversals. He treated the Hope Diamond as what it was, a very valuable and very famous piece of carbon arranged in a particular crystalline structure. In 1958, Winston made an extraordinary decision. He donated the Hope Diamond to the Smithsonian Institution, shipping it via registered mail in a plain brown paper package that he insured for $1 million. The most famous diamond in the world arrived at the museum in the same way you might mail a birthday present to a relative. The postal worker who delivered it had no idea what he was carrying. The Smithsonian accepted the diamond and placed it on display in the National Museum of Natural History, where it has remained ever since. Millions of people have viewed it over the decades, pressing close to the case, taking photos, reading the placard that explains its history and mentions the famous curse. The diamond sits there under lights that make it glow. Its deep blue color is extraordinary as ever. All that atomic boron still working its magic on the light that passes through the crystal structure. You can visit it any day the museum is open. You can stand there and look at it as long as you want. The curse, if it ever truly existed, seems to have finally been broken. But has the curse really ended? Or has it simply changed form? The diamond sits in a museum now, owned by no one and everyone, a public trust rather than a private possession. Perhaps curses, like everything else, must evolve with changing times. The Smithsonian has never reported any unusual misfortunes befalling its staff or visitors as a result of displaying the diamond. The museum doesn't suffer mysterious financial troubles or experience supernatural phenomena in the mineral hall. The guards who watch over it don't report feeling oppressed or sensing malevolent presences. The diamond is simply there, beautiful and famous and completely inert, a piece of geological history that happens to have an interesting past. Science tells us exactly what the Hope Diamond is and why it appears the way it does. It's a type 2b diamond, meaning it contains boron impurities that absorb red, yellow, and green light, while allowing blue light to pass through. This gives the diamond its signature color, a vivid grayish blue that appears slightly different depending on the lighting conditions. The diamond also exhibits red phosphorescence, meaning it glows red for a few seconds after being exposed to ultraviolet light. This property, while scientifically interesting, contributed to the diamond's reputation for being somehow supernatural or magical. Imagine showing someone in the 18th century a blue diamond that glowed red in the dark. They'd have no framework for understanding what they were seeing except magic or curse. The size of the diamond is also significant to understanding its history and its legend. At 45.52 carats, it's large enough to be immediately noticeable, but not so large as to be unwearable. You could mount it on a necklace or a brooch and actually wear it to events, which is exactly what many of its owners did. Larger diamonds often become too valuable to wear, kept in vaults and brought out only for major ceremonial occasions. The Hope Diamond was big enough to be impressive, but small enough to be part of someone's regular jewelry collection. This meant it was handled more, worn more, incorporated more fully into its owners' daily lives, which in turn meant there were more opportunities for the owner to experience misfortunes that could be attributed to the stone. If we step back and look at the curse legend critically, patterns emerge that suggest how such stories develop and persist. First, most of the people who owned the diamond were already members of extremely high-profile families or social circles. Kings, aristocrats, wealthy heiress, and socialites. These are people whose lives were inherently dramatic and well documented. When something bad happened to them, people noticed and remembered. When Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed, it was global news. When Evelyn Walsh McLean's son died or her daughter committed suicide, newspapers covered it extensively. The diamond's owners weren't ordinary people experiencing ordinary misfortunes in obscurity. They were famous people experiencing very public tragedies. Second, life in earlier eras was simply more dangerous and unpredictable than modern life. Child mortality was high, medical care was primitive, political violence was common, financial ruin could come suddenly through circumstances entirely beyond individual control. The French aristocrats who wore the diamond didn't die because the diamond cursed them. They died because France underwent a revolution, that systematically executed its aristocracy. The Hope family members who struggled financially didn't suffer because of a curse, but because managing inherited wealth across generations is difficult, and many wealthy families eventually lose their fortunes through poor investments, overspending, or simple bad luck. Third, the curse legend was actively promoted by some of the people involved in buying and selling the diamond because it made the stone more interesting and more valuable. Pierre Cartier deliberately embellished the curse story when trying to sell the diamond to Evelyn Walsh McLean. Newspaper reporters writing about the diamond played up the curse angle because it made for better stories than dry recitations of who owned what gem. The curse became part of the diamond's brand, a marketing tool that enhanced its mystique and justified its high price. A cursed diamond was worth more than an ordinary diamond, even if that curse existed only in stories people told. Fourth, confirmation bias plays an enormous role in curse legends. When something bad happens to someone who owns the supposedly cursed object, people say the curse struck again. When nothing bad happens, or when something good happens, people ignore it or explain it away. Harry Winston owned the Hope Diamond for years and experienced no tragedies, but this doesn't disprove the curse in believers' minds, because they can simply say Winston was too practical or too irreverent to be affected, or that the curse was dormant during his ownership. Any evidence that contradicts the curse can be rationalized away, while any evidence that supports it, no matter how circumstantial, is seized upon as proof. The modern visitor to the Smithsonian, standing in front of the diamond's case, has to reconcile two competing narratives. One is the curse story, that tale of stolen property and divine retribution, of misfortune following the stone through centuries and across continents, leaving a trail of destroyed lives in its wake. The other is the scientific and historical account, which explains the diamond as a remarkable mineral specimen with a well-documented provenance, beautiful and valuable certainly, but ultimately just an object with no inherent power to influence human affairs. Most visitors probably hold both narratives simultaneously, enjoying the thrill of the curse story while recognizing intellectually that curses aren't real. But what if we're thinking about curses all wrong? What if the Hope Diamond really is cursed, not through supernatural means, but through the very human psychological and social processes its existence triggers? Consider what possessing such an object does to people. It marks them as special, sets them apart, makes them targets for envy and theft. It represents such enormous wealth that it distorts relationships and decision-making. It demands to be displayed, to be shown off, which draws attention and scrutiny that can be dangerous. It's portable wealth, the kind that can be stolen relatively easily compared to land or buildings, which means its owners must constantly worry about security. Owning the Hope Diamond also placed people in specific historical contexts that were often turbulent. The French monarchy owned it during the period leading up to the Revolution. Lord Hope owned it during an era of declining aristocratic power and increasing democratization. The Macleans owned it during the early 20th century, when America's industrial fortunes were proving unstable and new money was displacing old money. In each case, the diamond's owners were navigating complex social changes, and the diamond itself became a symbol of the old order, the ancien régime, the idea that some people simply deserve to possess extraordinary things because of their birth or wealth. That kind of symbolism can be dangerous. The diamond also carried psychological weight for its owners. Evelyn Walsh McLean wore it constantly, making it part of her identity. When tragedy struck her family, she had to grapple with the question of whether the diamond had somehow caused them. Even if she didn't believe in curses rationally, the doubt must have been there, gnawing at her. That doubt, that psychological burden, could have contributed to her alcoholism and her other struggles. The diamond became a weight around her neck in more ways than one, a constant reminder that she owned something extraordinary and possibly dangerous, that she had perhaps claimed something she shouldn't have. There's also the question of whether the curse legend influenced events through a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you own a cursed object, you might make decisions differently. You might take fewer risks, or alternatively, you might take more risks, figuring you're doomed anyway. You might interpret ordinary misfortunes as manifestations of the curse, which could deepen depression or anxiety and lead to worse outcomes. Your relationships might suffer if people around you believe in the curse and want to avoid being near you or the object. The curse doesn't have to be metaphysically real to have real-world effects on behavior and psychology. From a gemological perspective, the Hope Diamond is fascinating for reasons having nothing to do with curses. Its color is exceptionally rare and beautiful, the result of a specific type of geological formation that occurred deep in the earth under precise conditions of heat and pressure. The crystal structure is remarkably pure, with few inclusions or flaws, which is unusual for a diamond of that size. The stone has been studied extensively by scientists interested in understanding its properties, and it has contributed to our knowledge of how diamonds form and how trace elements affect their appearance. In a very real sense, the diamond has advanced human knowledge, which seems like a blessing rather than a curse. The diamond's journey also tells us something about how we value objects and construct meaning around them. The stone itself hasn't changed in any fundamental way since it was formed billions of years ago. It's the same arrangement of carbon atoms, whether it sits in a Hindu temple, on a French king's crown, around an American heiress's neck, or in a museum case. But the meaning we assign to it has changed constantly. It's been a religious icon, a symbol of royal power, a trophy of colonialism, a cursed talisman, a collector's prize, and finally a public educational specimen. Each owner and each era projected different meanings onto the same physical object. This projection of meaning is really what the curse legend is about at its core. The story of the Hope Diamond curse is a story about how humans try to make sense of suffering and misfortune by creating narratives that impose order on chaos. When bad things happened to people who owned the diamond, observers looked for patterns and causes. The curse provided both. A simple explanation that tied disparate tragedies together into a coherent story with a clear beginning in that supposed temple theft. The real explanation for why Louis XVI was executed, or why Evelyn Walsh McLean's son died, complicated historical forces, medical randomness, human error, was far less satisfying than a curse that explained everything. The persistence of the curse legend also reveals something about what we want from our stories about wealth and power. There's a deep human desire to believe that ill-gotten gains will be punished, that those who take what isn't theirs will suffer consequences, that the universe has some built-in justice mechanism. The Hope Diamond curse legend serves this psychological need perfectly. It suggests that you can't simply steal something sacred and beautiful and expect to enjoy it without consequences. It promises that there are forces beyond human law that will exact revenge for violations of cosmic order. This is a comforting thought for people who see injustice go unpunished in the real world. Yet the actual history of the diamond suggests a more mundane reality. Most of its owners did suffer various misfortunes, but so does everyone given enough time. The question isn't whether bad things happened to people who owned the diamond. It's whether bad things happened at rates significantly higher than statistical chance would predict for people of similar social position and era. When you control for factors like the high mortality rates of pre-modern eras, the political instability of revolutionary periods, and the personal problems common among the extremely wealthy, the diamond's owners don't appear unusually unlucky. They appear normally lucky for their circumstances, which is to say they experienced a mix of fortune and misfortune that falls within expected parameters. The diamond's time in the Smithsonian has lasted longer now than many of its previous ownerships. It's been on display since 1958, weathering decades without apparent incident. The museum hasn't suffered unusual misfortunes. The curators and guards who work with the diamond haven't reported mysterious ailments or tragedies. Millions of visitors have stood in front of its case, and while I'm sure some of those individuals have subsequently experienced misfortunes, they've experienced them at rates no different from the general population. If the curse were real and transferable through mere proximity, the Smithsonian would be the unluckiest place in America. What the diamond has done during its museum years is educate. The exhibit explains not just the curse legend, but also the actual geology and history of the stone. Visitors learn about diamond formation, about the Golconda mines, about the gem trade, about the scientific properties that make this particular diamond unusual. Children stare at it and become interested in mineralogy. Students study it and learn about crystallography. The diamond has become a teaching tool, serving a purpose beyond simply being beautiful or valuable. Perhaps this is its best fate, neither cursed nor hoarded, but shared with everyone who wants to see it. Standing in front of the Hope Diamond, looking at that extraordinary blue colour, it's easy to understand why people have coveted it and why they've woven such elaborate stories around it. Beautiful things inspire powerful emotions, and powerful emotions demand explanations. The curse legend is one such explanation, a way of processing the feelings that arise when confronted with something so extraordinary that it seems to transcend ordinary physical reality. The diamond doesn't need to be actually cursed to provoke thoughts about fate, justice, mortality, and the price of beauty. Its mere existence is enough to make us contemplate these deeper questions. The truth about the Hope Diamond is probably simpler and stranger than either the curse legend or the pure scientific explanation suggests. It's a rock, yes, but a rock that has moved through human history, accumulating stories and meanings like a snowball rolling downhill accumulates snow. Each owner, each era, each telling of its story has added layers of interpretation that now seem inseparable from the object itself. The diamond in the Smithsonian case is simultaneously the original geological formation, the accumulated history of its human interactions, and the legends that have been spun around those interactions. You can't look at it and see only the rock any more than you can look at it and see only the curse. You see all of it at once, multiple realities layered on top of each other, And that complexity is perhaps more interesting than any single narrative could be. The island that appears and vanishes overnight. You've heard the stories your entire life, dismissed them as sailors' tales born from too much rum and too little sleep. But standing on the deck of the research vessel at 3 a.m, watching the impossible unfold before your eyes, you realize that some legends refuse to stay buried in the past. The island wasn't there at sunset. You're certain of it. You'd scanned the horizon yourself with a high-powered telescope, logged the readings, marked the coordinates. Empty ocean. Nothing but the endless roll of waves beneath the darkening sky. Yet now, in the peculiar light of pre-dawn, there it is, a dark mass rising from the water, like a sleeping giant slowly opening one eye. Dr. Sarah Chen stands beside you, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She's muttering calculations under her breath, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile what her instruments are telling her with what her eyes can see. The sonar readings make no sense. The depth charts you'd mapped just hours ago show nothing but ocean floor at 300 meters. Now, the instruments insist there's solid ground, vegetation, even what might be structures. This isn't possible, she says for the 3rd time, though her voice carries less conviction with each repetition. You've been part of this oceanographic expedition for 6 months, cataloguing the unexplored regions of the South Pacific. Your team has discovered new species of deep-sea fish, mapped previously uncharted underwater mountains, even found evidence of ancient volcanic activity. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has prepared you for this. The captain, a weathered Indonesian man named Budi, who spent 40 years navigating these waters, crosses himself and whispers something in a language you don't recognize. When you ask him about it later, he'll tell you about the old stories, about Pulau Hantu, the ghost island, about fishermen who'd stumbled upon it over the centuries, finding fresh water and fruit trees and beaches of black sand, only to return the next day and find nothing but open ocean and the lingering question of their own sanity. As the sun begins its slow climb above the horizon, the island becomes more distinct. You can make out individual trees now, their shapes strange and unfamiliar. There's a beach, just as the stories described, with sand so dark it looks like crushed obsidian. Further inland, we spot what appears to be ruins, stone structures covered in creeping vines, their architecture unlike anything you've seen in your studies of Pacific Island cultures. Sarah has her cameras out now, documenting everything. The scientific method demands evidence, verification, peer review, but you can see the tremor in her hands as she adjusts the lens. Some part of her understands that whatever you're witnessing exists beyond the comfortable boundaries of known science. The captain refuses to approach closer than half a kilometer. His crew, usually boisterous and fearless, works in unusual silence, casting nervous glances toward the impossible island. You don't blame them. There's something fundamentally wrong about the way the island sits in the water, as if it's not quite anchored to reality in the same way as the rest of the world. You volunteer to take the inflatable boat closer. Sarah argues against it. Proper protocol would be to document from a distance, to report the finding, to wait for a larger expedition with more resources. But you both know what will happen. By the time approvals come through and a new team assembles, the island will be gone. This is a moment that exists outside of time, and it demands immediate action. journey across the half-kilometre of water feels both eternal and instantaneous. The island seems to pulse with each stroke of the oars, growing more solid and real as you approach, yet somehow remaining ephemeral, as if it might dissolve back into sea foam at any moment. The water around it moves strangely too. The waves don't break against the shore the way they should. Instead, they seem to pass through it, as if the island exists slightly out of phase with the surrounding ocean. When the inflatable boat's bow finally scrapes against the black sand, you sit for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you're doing. You're about to step onto land that shouldn't exist, that your instruments swear appeared out of nowhere in the span of a few hours. Every rational part of your mind screams that this is impossible, yet here you are. The sand crunches beneath your boots with a sound like breaking glass. It's not actually sand, you realize as you crouch to examine it. It's volcanic rock, ground so fine by some unknown process that it mimics the texture of beach sand. You scoop some into a sample container, already imagining the lab analysis, the questions it will raise, papers that might be written if anyone believes you. The air smells wrong. Not bad, exactly, but different. There's the expected salt of the ocean, but underneath it, something else. Ozone, perhaps, or the metallic tang that comes before a lightning strike. The temperature feels off too, several degrees cooler than it should be given the tropical climate and the rising sun. You make your way inland, following what might be a path or might simply be a gap in the vegetation. The plants are unlike anything in your field guides. Some resemble ferns, but with leaves that shimmer with an iridescent quality, catching the light in ways that seem to defy standard botanical behavior. Others look almost familiar, similar to breadfruit or pandanus, but with subtle differences in their structure that mark them as something other. The ruins appear suddenly, emerging from the jungle growth, like teeth from diseased gums. They're made of the same black stone as the sand, but carved with precision that suggests advanced tools and mathematical knowledge. The symbols etched into the surfaces aren't any language you recognize, yet there's something hauntingly familiar about their patterns, as if they're tapping into some deep ancestral memory. You photograph everything, your camera clicking in rapid succession, knowing that physical evidence might be all that stands between you and accusations of elaborate hoaxing or mental breakdown. The structures form a rough circle, 12 pillars surrounding a central platform. On that platform sits something that makes your breath catch, a perfect sphere of what looks like polished obsidian, about the size of a basketball, resting in a carved depression. Your hand reaches toward it before your conscious mind registers the movement. The moment your fingers make contact, everything changes. The island lurches beneath you, or perhaps you lurch, or perhaps reality itself shifts slightly on its axis. The sphere is warm, impossibly warm for stone that's been sitting in pre-dawn air. Heat radiates up your arm, but it's not painful. It's almost pleasant, like sinking into a hot bath after a long cold day. Images flood your mind, too fast to process individually, but living impressions like photographs developing in solution. You see the island rising from the sea, not through geological processes, but through something else. Intention, perhaps, or need. You see people, their faces both familiar and alien, working the stone, building the structures, placing the sphere with reverent care. You see them leaving, walking into the ocean without fear, the water accepting them as if they belonged there more than on land. You see the island sinking, receding, vanishing beneath waves that close over it like a healing wound. You see it rising again and again and again in a cycle that stretches back further than human memory, further perhaps than humanity itself. When you pull your hand away, gasping, the sun has climbed noticeably higher in the sky. Time has passed, minutes or hours, you can't tell. Your radio crackles with Sarah's voice, tight with worry, demanding to know your status. You respond automatically, assuring her you're fine, that you're returning to the boat, even as your mind struggles to process what just happened. The walk back to the beach feels different. The island seems more solid now, more real, as if your touch somehow anchored it further into existence. Or perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps you've become less real, partially attuned to whatever strange frequency the island vibrates on. You're halfway across the water, back to the research vessel when you hear it. A sound like singing, but deeper than any human voice could produce. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the water, through the air, through your very bones. You turn back to look at the island, and for just a moment, you see figures standing on the beach. They're watching you, these impossible people, and though you can't make out their features at this distance, you know they're smiling. By the time you climb aboard the research vessel, your legs shaking from more than just physical exertion, the singing has stopped. Sarah helps you up, firing questions faster than you can answer. The rest of the crew gathers around, their earlier fear overcome by curiosity and the need to know what you found. You tell them everything, knowing how it sounds, watching their expressions shift from excitement to concern to barely concealed skepticism. The photographs will help, you think. The samples will provide proof. But even as you think it, you glance at your camera's display screen and feel your stomach drop. The images are there, technically. The ruins are visible, the strange vegetation, even the sphere. But there's something wrong with them. They're blurred in ways that have nothing to do with camera shake or poor focus. The structures seem to shift position between frames, as if the island couldn't quite decide where its own features should be. The sphere appears in some shots as solid black, in others as translucent, and in one particularly unsettling image, it seems to be looking back at the camera with something distressingly like awareness. Sarah examines the photographs with a deepening frown. She's trying to maintain scientific objectivity, to find rational explanations. Unusual atmospheric conditions, equipment malfunction, anything that fits within the comfortable boundaries of known phenomena. But you can see the doubt creeping into her eyes. This is too strange, too consistent in its strangeness, to be dismissed as simple technical error. The sample container you'd filled with the black sand presents its own mystery. Under the research vessel's microscope, the particles don't behave like volcanic glass should. They seem to move slightly, even in the absence of any vibration or air current, arranging and rearranging themselves into patterns that almost resemble writing. Sarah runs every test she can think of: spectrographic analysis, chemical composition, crystalline structure, and each test returns results that contradict the previous one, as if the substance can't quite decide what it wants to be. Captain Booty keeps the ship at its safe distance, but he's stationed crew members to watch the island constantly. You join them for the vigil as the day progresses, watching the impossible landmass that continues to defy every law of geology and physics by simply existing. During the afternoon, you spot movement on the beach. The same figures you'd glimpsed earlier, though now there are more of them. They don't appear to be doing anything in particular, just existing in their strange, half-real state, occasionally looking out toward the ship with what might be curiosity or might be warning. As evening approaches, Sarah pulls you aside. She's been on the radio with the expedition's funding organization, trying to report the discovery, and the conversation hasn't gone well. Without more concrete evidence, without data that makes sense within accepted scientific frameworks, they're dismissing it as a hoax or hallucination. They're suggesting contaminated water supplies, collective hysteria, even the possibility of a publicity stunt. The frustration radiates off her in waves. "We need to go back," she says quietly. "Both of us this time. More cameras, more samples, detailed measurements, something that can't be explained away or dismissed as equipment malfunction." You know she's right, but something in your gut twists at the thought of returning to that beach, touching that sphere again. The visions it had shown you weren't just images, they were invitations, or perhaps warnings. The island appears and vanishes for a reason, following some pattern or purpose that your brief contact only hinted at. But scientific curiosity wins out over caution, as it so often does. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, you and Sarah prepare another expedition to the island. This time, you bring more equipment: ground-penetrating radar, core sampling tools, electromagnetic field detectors, anything that might provide objective data about this impossible place. The figures on the beach watch as you approach. In the golden light of late afternoon, you can see them more clearly now. They're human in shape, but not quite in substance, as if they're made of water and light and memory, rather than flesh and bone. They don't try to stop you as you land the inflatable boat and haul your equipment onto the black sand. They simply watch, with expressions that might be sadness, or might be something else entirely. Sarah sets up the ground-penetrating radar while you begin taking soil samples. The work is methodical, familiar, grounding. It helps to focus on concrete tasks, to let your hands remember their training while your mind grapples with the impossible nature of your surroundings. The radar, however, refuses to cooperate. It shows the island extending down into the water, but the readings fluctuate wildly. One moment the island has roots reaching hundreds of meters into the ocean floor. The next moment it appears to be floating on the surface like a lily pad. The next, it seems to exist simultaneously at multiple depths. You make your way back to the ruins, Sarah following close behind. The electromagnetic field detectors are going haywire, their needles swinging back and forth as if caught in an invisible storm. The sphere still sits on its platform, warm and patient, waiting. This time, you approach it with more caution, pulling out a thermal imaging camera first. The camera's display shows the sphere as a point of intense heat, far hotter than it feels to your nearby skin. But it's not radiating that heat into the surrounding air the way physics demands it should. Instead, the thermal energy seems to be flowing into the sphere from somewhere else, as if it's connected to some distant source of power through channels you can't perceive. Sarah reaches out to touch it, but you stop her. "Wait," you say, and spend several minutes explaining what happened when you made contact earlier. The visions, the lost time, the sense of being fundamentally changed by the experience. She listens with the careful attention of a scientist evaluating experimental protocols, then reaches out anyway. Her reaction is different from yours. Where you had been overwhelmed by images and sensations, she seems to achieve some kind of communion with the sphere. Her eyes lose focus, but not in a way that suggests unconsciousness. Instead, she appears to be looking at something vast and complex, her expression shifting through wonder, fear, understanding, and finally a kind of peaceful acceptance. When she pulls away, tears are streaming down her face. "It's not an island," she whispers. "It's a message, a warning." She struggles to articulate what she experienced, her scientific vocabulary failing to capture the essence of what the sphere communicated. But gradually, a picture emerges. The island is a marker, placed here millennia ago by people or beings who understood that the ocean holds memory the way stone holds heat. They'd witnessed something, some great catastrophe or transformation, and they'd created this place as a warning for those who would come after. The island appears when conditions align, when the same confluence of factors that preceded the ancient disaster begins to manifest again. You ask what disaster, what danger could be so important that it warranted creating something that defies the laws of nature? Sarah shakes her head, frustrated by the limitations of language and human perception. "It's about balance," she says finally. "The ocean, the land, the boundary between them. When that balance shifts too far, when too much is taken or too much is given, the system corrects itself. Violently, the implications settle over you like a heavy blanket. The rising sea levels, the changing ocean chemistry, the warming waters, all the environmental changes that your expedition has been documenting. According to the sphere's message, these aren't just concerning trends. They're symptoms of an approaching threshold, a point of no return after which the ocean will reclaim what it has lost, reshaping coastlines and swallowing cities in a correction that has happened before and will happen again. The sun is touching the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seem too vivid to be natural. The figures on the beach have multiplied, dozens of them now, perhaps hundreds. They're moving toward the water, their forms becoming more translucent as they approach the waves. You realize with a chill that you're watching the same departure you'd seen in your vision, the island's creators returning to the ocean that spawns them, or accepting it as their final resting place. Sarah is frantically trying to document everything, but her equipment is failing in increasingly spectacular ways. Cameras short out, batteries drain in seconds, recording devices capture only static. The island is preparing to depart, and it seems determined not to leave behind evidence that would let the world dismiss its warning as fantasy or fraud. You feel it in your bones when the transition begins. A subtle shift in the air pressure, a change in the way sound travels, as if reality is holding its breath. The sphere on its platform begins to glow, not with light exactly, but with a kind of concentrated darkness that somehow illuminates rather than obscures. The ruins around it start to hum, a sound that you feel more than hear, resonating at a frequency that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur. "We need to leave," you tell Sarah, grabbing her arm. "Now." She resists for a moment, unwilling to abandon the opportunity for observation, but then she feels it too. The island pulling away from the world, sliding back into whatever impossible space it occupies between appearances. You run for the beach, your equipment abandoned, the scientific method forgotten in the face of more primal imperatives. The inflatable boat seems impossibly far away, though it can't be more than 100 meters. The sand is changing beneath your feet, becoming less solid, more fluid, as if the island is already halfway to being ocean again. The figures in the water watch you struggle toward salvation, their expressions understanding but unsympathetic. This is the price of knowledge, their ancient eyes seem to say. This is the burden of witness. You reach the boat and shove it into the water, Sarah tumbling in beside you. Your hands fumble with the oars, clumsy with panic and haste. Behind you, the island is visibly sinking now, the ruins disappearing beneath rising water, the strange vegetation folding in on itself like a flower closing at nightfall. The sphere's glow intensifies one final time, and in that flash you see it all clearly. The pattern, the cycle, the inevitable conclusion that waits at the end of current trends. The research vessel seems to take forever to reach, though Captain Booty has brought it as close as he dares. Hands reach down to pull you aboard, voices asking questions you can't yet answer. You collapse on the deck, gasping, watching the place where the island had been. There's nothing there now but water, reflecting the last light of day, giving no indication that anything unusual ever existed in that spot. Sarah sits beside you, her scientific composure finally cracking. She's laughing and crying simultaneously, the sound slightly hysterical, but also somehow triumphant. You've witnessed something impossible, something that will change how you understand the world, even if you can never prove it to anyone else. That night, as the research vessel motors away from the coordinates that now show nothing but empty ocean, you and Sarah compile your evidence. The blurred photographs, the inconsistent sample readings, the equipment failures, all of it adds up to a story that no one will believe. But you have to try. The island appeared for a reason, delivered its warning to those who would listen. You spend hours writing the report, trying to find words that convey the urgency without sounding like madness. Sarah contributes technical details, scientific observations, anything that might lend credibility. When you're finished, you both know it's not enough. The world isn't ready to believe in impossible islands and ancient warnings delivered through obsidian spheres. The evidence is too ambiguous, too easily dismissed. But as dawn breaks on a new day, you realize that belief isn't actually necessary. The warning has been delivered, whether anyone accepts it or not. The island will appear again when conditions warrant, will continue its cycle of emergence and submergence, faithful to its purpose across centuries and millennia. You stand on the deck and look back toward the horizon, toward the spot where the impossible briefly became real. The ocean keeps its secrets well, you think, but sometimes when the need is great enough, it shares them with those who have the courage to listen. Captain Booty joins you at the rail, his weathered face thoughtful. "My grandfather saw it once," he says quietly. "Told me stories when I was young. I thought he was just an old man, his mind going, making up tales." He pauses, then adds, "I'm sorry I didn't believe him. I understand now why he spent his last years trying to warn people about the ocean's patience running out." The research vessel sails on through calm seas, carrying you back toward a world that will never quite make sense again. Somewhere in your cabin, the sample container sits with its impossible sand, still shifting into patterns that might be writing or might be random movement. The photographs fill your camera's memory, blurred evidence of something that existed between one moment and the next. You know you'll spend the rest of your career trying to understand what you witnessed, trying to decode the warning, trying to find a way to make people listen. Sarah will too. Her scientific skepticism transformed into evangelical certainty by the touch of the sphere. Together, you'll become those people others whisper about, the scientists who claim to have found an island that can't exist, who warn about disasters written in ancient stone and encoded in volcanic glass. But on quiet nights, when sleep eludes you, and the sound of waves reminds you of that impossible shore, you'll know the truth. The island will appear again, exactly when it needs to, carrying its message forward through time. And somewhere, the ocean keeps its vigil, patient and eternal, waiting to see if humanity will finally learn to listen before the balance tips too far and the correction begins. The warning has been given. The rest, as it always has been, is up to those who have the wisdom to heed it. The forest that moves on its own. In the highlands of what is now called Transylvania, there existed a forest that the locals refused to name. They called it only the woods that walk, or the trees with feet, and they marked its boundaries with stones painted red, warning travellers to go around, never through. This was in the year 1743, though the forest had been moving long before any calendar marked time in those mountains. Elena first heard of the forest from her grandmother, who heard it from her grandmother, who claimed to have seen it shift positions between the valley and the ridge over the course of a single lifetime. The old woman said the forest had once stood 3 miles to the east, covering the meadow where the village now kept its sheep. She said the trees moved slowly, so slowly that you could watch one for a year and never see it take a step, but that if you looked away and then looked back after many seasons, you would find it had travelled far. Elena was 24 years old when she decided to find the truth. She had spent her whole life in the village of Brasov, working in her father's workshop, binding books and copying manuscripts for the monastery. She had read everything the monks would allow her to read, and many things they would not. And in all those pages she had never found a single mention of a forest that could move. Yet everyone in her village spoke of it as fact, as certain as the sunrise, as real as the mountains themselves. On the morning of the 15th of March, 1743, Elena packed a leather satchel with bread, cheese, dried meat, a tinderbox, 2 candles, her journal, and 3 quills with a bottle of ink. She told her father she was visiting her aunt in the next valley, kissed her younger brother goodbye, and set out before dawn when the air was still sharp with winter's memory. The red stones marked the forest's current boundary along the old Roman road, about 2 miles north of the village. Elena had passed these stones 100 times in her life, but had never stepped beyond them. The superstition ran deep, enforced not by law, but by fear that had calcified over generations into something harder than any rule. She crossed the boundary at mid-morning, when the sun had climbed high enough to cast short shadows. The moment she stepped past the red stones, she felt a change in the air. Not magical exactly, but different. The way the air feels different inside a church or a cave. The forest before her was dense with oak and beech, their trunks massive and ancient, their roots breaking through the earth in twisted coils that looked almost like fingers grasping at the soil. Elena walked for an hour, marking her path by breaking small branches at eye level, a trick her brother had taught her. The forest was quieter than she expected. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered in the branches. The only sound was her own footsteps on the carpet of old leaves and the whisper of wind through the canopy high above. She found the first sign 2 hours after entering. It was a root, thick as her thigh, that had broken the surface of the earth in a way that looked almost deliberate. The root stretched across her path like a serpent, and where it emerged from the ground, the soil was freshly disturbed, dark and moist, as if the tree had only just pushed it up through the earth. Elena knelt and touched the exposed root. It was warm, warmer than it should have been in the cool spring air. She wrote in her journal, "Root feels alive in a way that ordinary roots do not, as if blood moves through it instead of the sap." Elena continued deeper. The trees grew larger as she went, their trunks so wide that 5 men holding hands could not have circled them. The bark was strange too, rougher than normal oak, with patterns that almost looked like faces if you stared long enough. Sad faces, angry faces, faces frozen in eternal surprise. She touched one of these patterns, tracing what might have been an eye, and the bark felt warm beneath her fingers, pulsing faintly with something that might have been a heartbeat, or might have been her imagination. At noon, she stopped to eat. She sat with her back against one of the massive trees and unwrapped her bread and cheese. As she ate, she watched the forest around her, looking for any sign of movement. The trees stood perfectly still, as trees should. Nothing walked, nothing shifted. She began to wonder if the stories were just stories after all, myths created to explain ordinary things. Perhaps the forest had simply grown over time, spreading naturally, and people had mistaken its slow expansion for deliberate movement. Then she heard the sound. It was deep, so deep she felt it in her chest before she heard it with her ears. A groaning, creaking sound, like the hull of a great ship straining against heavy seas. Elena stood quickly, scattering crumbs, her heart suddenly racing. The sound came again, and this time she could tell it came from all around her, from the trees themselves, as if they were speaking to each other in a language of wood and fibre. She backed away from the tree she had been leaning against, and saw that the pattern in its bark, the face she had traced with her finger, had changed. The eye was now open wider, and the mouth, which before had been a neutral line, now curved downward in what might have been sorrow or warning. Elena ran. She ran back the way she had come, following her broken branches, her satchel bouncing against her hip. A groaning sound followed her, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes all around. She did not look back. She did not stop. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, ran until she burst through the tree line and stumbled past the red stones, collapsing on the safe side of the boundary. She lay in the grass, gasping, her face pressed against the earth. When she finally gathered the courage to look back, the forest stood exactly as it had before, silent and still, revealing nothing. But Elena had seen enough. She knew now that the stories were true. The forest was alive in a way that ordinary forests were not, and it was aware of her. She returned to the village and told no one what had happened. She went back to her father's workshop and resumed her work, binding books and copying manuscripts. But every day she thought about the forest. She read everything she could find about forests, about trees, about ancient magics and old gods. She read Roman histories that mentioned dark groves where druids practiced forbidden rites. She read Christian texts that spoke of demons dwelling in wild places. She read folk tales from 12 different lands, all telling variations of the same story. Trees that walked, forests that thought, woods that hungered. 3 months passed. Summer came, thick and warm, filling the valley with the scent of wildflowers and new grass. Elena continued her research, filling journal after journal with notes and theories. She became obsessed, barely sleeping, barely eating, until her father grew concerned and her brother began to worry that she had been cursed. On the 21st of June, the summer solstice, Elena returned to the forest. This time she came prepared. She brought rope, chalk, a knife, more food, and a small bronze mirror that had belonged to her grandmother. She also brought something else, a cutting from a willow tree, still green and living, which she had kept in water for the past week, encouraging it to grow roots. She crossed the red stones at dawn and entered the forest with her head high and her fear carefully controlled. She went deeper this time, past the place where she had eaten lunch on her first visit, past the tree with the changing face, deeper into the heart of the moving wood. The trees here were even larger, so tall that their tops disappeared into a canopy so thick that only scattered needles of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The trunks were covered in moss that glowed faintly green in the dim light, and mushrooms grew in rings around their bases. White mushrooms with red spots, the kind her grandmother had warned her never to touch. Lena found what she was looking for in a clearing, though calling it a clearing was not quite right. It was more like a space where the trees had chosen not to grow, a perfect circle about 30 feet across, carpeted with soft grass that seemed too green, too perfect, to be natural. In the center of the circle stood a single stone, dark and smooth, carved with symbols that Elena did not recognize. She approached it slowly, her hand on the knife at her belt, though she knew a knife would be useless against whatever power dwelled here. She knelt before the stone and placed the willow cutting on its surface. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. I come seeking knowledge, not to harm or take. I offer this living gift in exchange for understanding. Why do you move? What do you seek? For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest remained silent. Elena waited, counting her breaths, forcing herself to stay calm. Then the stone began to warm beneath the willow cutting. The warmth spread, and the cutting's roots, which Elena had carefully encouraged to grow, began to lengthen and thicken before her eyes. They grew down into the stone, impossibly, as if the stone were soft earth, and the willow's leaves unfurled and reached upward toward the distant sky. The groaning sound came again, but softer this time, almost gentle, and Elena understood, not through words, but through feeling, through a knowledge that seemed to pour directly into her mind. The forest was answering her. The forest had been moving for thousands of years, since long before humans built their villages in these mountains. It moved because it was searching, slowly wandering across the land, seeking something it had lost in an age before memory. What it sought, the forest itself had forgotten. It knew only that it must continue searching, must keep moving, driven by an ancient purpose that had become instinct. The trees were not individual beings, but parts of a greater whole, like fingers on a hand or leaves on a branch. The forest itself was the creature, and it thought in seasons rather than moments, planned in decades rather than days. It moved by growing new roots ahead, while the old roots behind slowly died, a process so gradual that even the longest-lived human would see only the slightest shift. Elena understood all this in an instant, the way you understand a dream upon waking. The knowledge came with a cost, a terrible loneliness that made her gasp and press her hands to her chest. The forest was alone, utterly alone, the last of its kind. There had been others once, other forests that thought and moved, covering the world in green consciousness. But they had been burned, cut down, built over, destroyed by the small, quick creatures who had no patience for things that moved slowly and thought in centuries. This forest survived only because it had learned to hide, to seem ordinary, to move so slowly that humans dismissed the stories as superstition. But it was dying anyway, not from violence, but from loneliness, from the slow erosion of purpose. It had been searching for so long that it could no longer remember what it sought, and without purpose, even a forest mind begins to feed. Elena wept. She wept for the forest and for herself, for all the lonely things in the world that search for connection they can never find. Her tears fell on the stone and on the willow cutting that now grew from it, and the forest felt her grief and understood that she, too, was searching for something she could not name. The willow grew faster, its trunk thickening, its branches spreading. In the span of hours, it became a young tree, then a mature tree, its roots diving deep into the stone and through it into the earth beneath. The forest accepted this gift, this living bridge between Elena's world and its own, and through the willow it spoke more clearly. It showed her memories, visions that unfolded in her mind like stories. She saw the forest as it had been 10,000 years ago, stretching from one horizon to the other, connected to a dozen other forest minds across a world that was mostly wild. She saw how they had communicated through roots that touched beneath the earth, sharing thoughts across vast distances, thinking slow, deep thoughts about the nature of growth and decay, light and darkness, life and death. She saw the first humans arrive, small and quick and terrified, seeking shelter beneath the branches. The forests had not minded. There was room enough for everyone, and the humans were interesting, with their fast thoughts and their strange ability to change the world around them, with tools and fire. The forests had watched with curiosity as the humans built shelters, planted crops, domesticated animals, created societies. But the humans multiplied faster than the forests had anticipated. They cut trees for fuel and building, cleared land for farming, burned the woods to drive out predators. They did not understand that some forests were alive in a way that other forests were not, that some groves were individual minds that could feel pain and loss. Or perhaps they understood and did not care, driven by their own needs, their own desperate search for safety and prosperity. One by one, the forest minds died, cut down, burned, drowned beneath rising seas, paved over with stone roads and cities. They died calling out to each other through their root networks, their last thoughts shared across diminishing distances until only silence remained. This forest, the last one, had survived by retreating to the mountains, to places too steep and rocky for easy farming, too remote for cities. It moved constantly, following the wild spaces, staying ahead of the expanding human world. But but the wild spaces were shrinking. Every year, the forest had fewer places to go. Every decade, it grew more difficult to hide. Elena saw all this and understood that she was witnessing the end of something ancient and irreplaceable. In 100 years, perhaps less, this forest would have nowhere left to move. It would be discovered, studied, cut down for timber, or cleared for farmland, or simply burned, because people fear what they cannot understand. Unless something changed. Elena opened her eyes, unaware that she had closed them. The sun had moved. Hours had passed while she communed with the forest mind. The willow tree was now fully grown, as tall as the surrounding oaks, its silver-green leaves rustling in a breeze Elena could not feel. Through its roots, she remained connected to the forest, could feel its thoughts like a second heartbeat alongside her own. She spoke aloud, forming the thought that had been growing in her mind. What if people knew, not as superstition, but as truth? What if they understood what you are, what you represent? Would they protect you, or would they fear you more? The forest's response was complex, layered with centuries of experience. Some humans might protect it, yes, but others would seek to destroy it precisely because they understood its power. And still others would want to study it, dissect it, understand how it worked, which would be a different kind of death. The forest had survived by remaining a myth, a story told to frighten children and amuse travelers. To be revealed would be to be destroyed. Elena sat back on her heels, thinking. She was a scholar, trained to preserve knowledge, to copy texts and maintain records. Every instinct told her to document what she had discovered, to write down everything the forest had shown her, to share this incredible finding with the world. But she was also human enough to understand what that would mean. The scholars would come, then the curious, then the fearful, then the soldiers with their axes and torches. Then, "I will keep your secret," she said finally. "But I will visit you if you allow it. I will walk with you as you move through the mountains. I will be your witness, even if I can never tell anyone what I have witnessed." The forest considered this. Elena felt its deliberation, slow and careful as roots seeking water through stone. Finally, it agreed. More than agreed. It welcomed her. In all the long centuries of its existence, it had never had a companion who truly understood what it was. The loneliness had been growing unbearable. Even if Elena could only stay for brief moments of her brief life, even if she would die in what was, to the forest, barely an eye blink of time, still it was grateful for the connection. They made a pact that day, Elena and the forest. She would come once every new moon, would sit in the clearing with the willow tree, would share her thoughts and receive the forest's slow wisdom in return. She would keep its secret, would mark its boundaries with the red stones, would ensure that the villagers continued to fear and avoid it. In exchange, the forest would share its memories, would teach her things that no book could contain, would show her a perspective on time and existence that no human had ever known. For 37 years, Elena kept that pact. She never married, never left the valley, never spoke of what she knew. She continued to work in her father's workshop, and after he died, she ran it herself, becoming known as the finest bookbinder in the region. She trained her brother's children in the craft, teaching them to respect knowledge and guard secrets, though she never told them the greatest secret of all. Every month, on the night of the new moon, She would tell her apprentices she needed to gather herbs in the mountains, and she would walk to wherever the forest had moved itself. Sometimes she had to walk for miles, following the slowly shifting boundary marked by the red stones that she quietly moved to match the forest's migration. Sometimes the forest had barely traveled at all, its roots settling in a location for years before moving on. She watched the forest shift northward, always northward over the decades. She calculated that it moved approximately 1 mile every 7 years, though the pace was not constant. Some years it moved quickly, as much as half a mile. Other years it barely moved at all, its roots holding firm as if it had found a place it particularly liked. Through the willow tree, the forest told her its thoughts. It spoke of the changing seasons with an intimacy that only something that had witnessed 10,000 springs could know. It told her how the winter of 1752 had been the coldest in 300 years, how the summer of 1768 had been so wet that mushrooms grew thick as carpets on its floor. It spoke of the animals that sheltered in its shade, the wolves that denned among its roots, the owls that nested in its highest branches, the deer that came to browse on the saplings at its edges. Elena, in turn, told the forest about the human world. She told it about the books she bound, the stories they contained, the ideas that humans created and shared through writing. She explained wars and religions, art and science, love and loss. The forest listened with fascination to these tales of the quick, bright creatures who lived such intense, brief lives. In 1779, when Elena was 60 years old, she noticed that the forest had stopped moving. For 3 years, it remained in the same location, its roots settled deep into a valley between 2 peaks. She asked it why, and it showed her. Beneath this valley ran the aquifer, a river of pure water flowing through limestone caves, and the water tasted of minerals and time. The forest was drinking deeply, storing strength for the journey ahead. In 1780, the soldiers came. They were Austrian troops marching through the mountains on their way to some distant conflict Elena did not understand. They made camp in the valley below the forest, and their officers, seeing the dense woods, ordered their men to cut timber for fires and fortifications. The soldiers took their axes and approached the red stones. Elena, in her workshop 3 miles away, felt a cold dread settle over her heart. She could not say how she knew, but she knew. The forest was in danger. She left her work unfinished, ignored her apprentice's questions, and ran. Actually ran, though she was 60 years old and had not run in years. Up the mountain path toward the forest. She arrived to find the soldiers already cutting. They'd crossed the boundary marked by the red stones, dismissed the local warnings as superstition, and begun felling the outer trees. Elena watched in horror as a massive oak, one she had touched 100 times, crashed to the earth with a groan that sounded exactly like a scream. She felt the forest's pain through the connection they shared, a sharp agony that made her stumble and fall to her knees. The soldiers were not just cutting trees, they were cutting flesh, severing nerves, causing wounds that would take decades to heal if they healed at all. Elena stood and ran toward the soldiers, shouting at them to stop, but they laughed at the old women and pushed her aside. Their captain, a young man with cold eyes, told her that the Empire needed timber more than it needed old-growth forest. She should go home before she got hurt. She refused to leave. She stood between the soldiers and the next tree they had marked for cutting, spreading her arms, daring them to strike her down along with the oak. captain ordered her removed, and 2 soldiers grabbed her arms and began to drag her away. That was when the forest began to move, not slowly as it had moved for all the centuries of its existence. This time it moved quickly, desperately, like an animal fleeing fire. The roots beneath the earth twisted and writhed. The trees groaned and creaked. The ground itself began to shift and buckle as the forest pulled up its anchoring roots and began to run.